It was around the time of the Disney buyout that I started being much more online, much more tech-savvy, and was much more aware of the opinions of the masses, especially with the prequels. Because, George had sold the franchise to Disney, TCW was getting canned. I remember, this was years ago, the videos, I don't know if the video's still around. I made a video bitching about TCW getting canceled and that Cartoon Network was a piece of shit, completely forgetting that Cartoon Network is a rival company to Disney. Why would Disney want TCW to be on Cartoon Network when it would make Cartoon Network money? I was really stupid. I was a really stupid kid. Either way, I started getting back into TCW because Season 6 was coming out, and I decided to catch up on certain parts of the show. I didn't fully finish TCW, and actually I still haven't technically fully finished TCW because I didn't finish. There's one arc I wasn't able to finish, the droid arc, which I didn't watch as a kid. I started watching it, I think sometime last year, and I just couldn't finish it. It was so boring. So technically, I never actually finished TCW. I watched all of the other episodes at this point. It's just the last two droid arc episodes I haven't watched, and I don't know if I'm ever going to rewatch. I don't know if I'm ever going to watch them. Not rewatch because I didn't finish them, but I don't know if I'm ever going to watch the droid arc. if I'm ever going to finish that boring slog of an arc, because holy shit. Like, after Gregor left the Clone Commando, I was just like, nah, this is boring. I'm done. I fuck D-Squad. And fuck the stupid little mini general that, oh, he was so annoying. Anyway. But yeah, by this point, TCW was winding down, so I decided to catch up. I finally saw the Darth Maul stuff and was blown away by how good of a character Darth Maul was, but initially I was very disappointed that TCW got canceled. Not, keep in mind, I was also a stupid kid who didn't realize the politics behind were the reason why, not Cartoon Network itself. But yeah, I was pretty upset when TCW was canceled, even though I wasn't watching much of it at the time, because my interest veered towards other things. I still liked the Clone Wars show. I did hold the opinion for a while that it wasn't as good as the 2D show, because I loved the 2D show so much. Nowadays, I think it was around Siege of Mandalore where I sort of changed my opinion on that to where I think they're both great for their own reasons. But at the time, I preferred the 2D show. But I still enjoyed the 3D show for what it was worth. It still had some moments that I really enjoyed. Ahsoka became a much more likable character. She got 2 lightsabers, and considering that Force Unleashed did the same thing with Starkiller, that was pretty freaking cool. Although Force Unleashed 2, I was pretty disappointed by as a whole. I played the HD version this time around, not the Wii version, but I played the game and I was pretty underwhelmed with its story, and I didn't really care for what it did with Starkiller. So, it wasn't like atrocious as I treated it as a kid, but I was pretty disappointed that Force Unleashed 2 was just kind of meh. Which, because I loved Force Unleashed, so it was a little disappointing that the sequel just kind of turned out so eh. I felt like, it really didn't need to exist. But either way, it was cool that Starkiller had 2 lightsabers. Now Ahsoka has 2 lightsabers. I thought it was a neat parallel. It was around this time where I actually realized, oh, Ahsoka, and Starkiller, their training is kind of similar because they're trained by Anakin, who's Darth Vader. I was a very slow kid, okay? Either way, around this time, the Disney buyout was happening. Some of the last couple of projects from LucasArts were coming out. I think The Force Unleashed 2 was the last major project from LucasArts before they were shut down after the Disney acquisition. Not a very good way to go out. I know they had Star Wars 1313, which was announced, but that just fizzled out and never came out. I sort of figured it was going to get canned, which sucks because it could have been a really cool game. I don't know. Granted, I know the development of that game was just a shit show, and that concept trailer was all we really had. They were going back and forth on whether it would be a Boba Fett story or not, which is kind of odd because we already have a younger Boba Fett story with TCW and Attack of the Clones, so why are we doing this again? Is this what's happening? I also, was very much like confused about like what would happen with Star Wars now that it was sold to Disney. There was a lot of anger online for various reasons, but also a lot of interest as well. But it was around this time where I was getting more tech savvy, I started reading more forums, and I started getting into the fan base and looking at their opinions a little more. So, when I was younger, obviously, when you're online, some opinions and videos will definitely, like, how do I put this? It was around this time I started watching like critical videos of the prequels and George Lucas and the special editions and TCW even, albeit to a lesser extent because TCW did still have fans, and I still considered myself a fan of the show. It was around this time that I started looking more into the fandom side of things and why they didn't like the prequels, and I basically went along with the crowd because I wanted to feel like I belonged. I was a Star Wars fan. I'm legitimate. I'll say Plinkett's opinions verbatim, like, oh, Phantom Menace is the worst thing since my son, and Attack of the Clones is the worst thing since Phantom Menace, and even Revenge of the Sith. Well, I couldn't bring myself to say I hated Revenge of the Sith, but I said it was a guilty pleasure. Nowadays, I don't deem it a guilty pleasure. I deem it as a good movie, even if it has flaws, mainly with the dialogue. But I do like Revenge of the Sith now. But at the time, I was embarrassed to admit that I liked it because, like, oh, the Star Wars prequels, they're hated. They're a guilty pleasure. I still stood by TCW and the Clone Wars cartoon, and that's still made up of the prequel era. But you could tell, in fact, a very good way to tell. I have movie commentaries of the first three first three Star Wars movies. Yeah, except they're not the first three. I have movie commentaries of the prequels where you can tell I was very much drinking the Kool-Aid of Phantom Menace haters and Attack of the Clone haters. I was very much excited that, oh yeah, George Lucas, he won't be involved with Star Wars. We won't have the special editions and the prequels and stuff, and I was very much into that. It's not a time I look back on fondly. I look back at myself and I'm like, yeah, you're a fucking schmuck. You're gonna regret this. You're gonna wish George Lucas came back in some form. You didn't appreciate him, It's even funnier, too, because, like, a lot of TCW's best stories also came from George Lucas. And, not even realizing that, I was like, oh, TCW, it's all Filoni. He was the one who made it. Man, the people of that show really showed George Lucas, but it's like, George Lucas was involved with TCW, you fucking schmuck. You fucking dumbass. You don't know anything about Star Wars, do you? I was a teenager at the time. I was about to exit high school. It was 2012, I believe, when the Disney acquisition happened. I think it was 2012 or 2013. And, Force Awakens was then quickly announced. The original cast was coming back. I was a little worried, however, despite the fact that, yeah, George Lucas isn't involved and everything. It should be a cause for celebration. I was a little worried, though, because, Disney, even though they had proven, they could handle a big franchise for boys like Marvel. I mean, Marvel was on top of the world, because 2012 was when the first Avengers movie came out, and at that point, they were basically untouchable. So I figured that what we would get would probably be good, but I was a little concerned, how exactly would the original cast factor into this? would the sequel trilogies be worth, would the sequel trilogy, I say trilogies, I didn't know if they would make more, would these movies be worth it? I was initially concerned at the time that, maybe there might be too much of Star Wars. But, I put those fears to the side for a little bit because, at the end of the day, yeah, they got it. This is Disney. If they can do so well with Marvel, I don't see why they can't do the same thing with Star Wars. Little did I know that it would turn out I would be right in my assessment, but that would be years later where I came to that realization. Little did I also know just how much of an effect George Lucas did have on not just like the original trilogy and the prequels, but also TCW, and just, I kind of took a lot of his work for granted, and you don't know what you have until it's gone. I feel like I owe George Lucas a little bit of an apology. Granted, he doesn't really care. He doesn't know me, so it's not that big of a deal. I never sent hate mail to anyone. I never sent death threats to anyone. Never sent anything to George, even though I was parading around, oh, George Lucas is the reason why Star Wars sucks. Even though I was parading Mr. Plinkett's opinions like fucking gospel, I never sent any hate towards his way. I never sent any, hatred towards anyone's way. At least as far as I'm aware. Unless I did so and I just forgot about it. I highly doubt it. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where I look back on it and I'm like, man, this schmuck he's gonna get what's coming to him. I listen to some of my older work where I talk about Star Wars is like, you're gonna get exactly what you fucking deserve, you fucking schmuck. You're gonna be begging for George Lucas to come back. If you want a good look at, how I was around the time of the Disney acquisition, those movie commentaries are a good way to view them. I'll even play some clips from them in between parts of this video just to kind of give you an idea. I'm going to probably cringe and wince the entire time. The audio is so fucking bad, it's probably stupidly out of sync, and let's be honest here, I was an asshole. I was just out of high school, and teenagers are fucking assholes, and I was no exception. So I apologize for the pain. Do not listen to the entire movie commentary. Those movie commentaries are absolute poodoo. Do not bother. Then why did you do it? Why the hell did you do it if you thought Anakin wasn't ready for this assignment? Which he isn't, I'll give you that. That is actually true. Why did you do it then? Tell me. Please, Mace Windu. Tell me, please. Why did you do it? No, Yoda! Shut the fuck up, Yoda. Shut the fuck up. I want to hear that black man talk, alright? What is it? What is it?
I can't watch anymore.
Obviously, I still considered, Revenge of the Sith a guilty pleasure. Nowadays, I don't think there's anything to be guilty about with enjoying it. And, I defended TCW. I thought TCW was a decent show. But it was at the time I thought, oh, TCW, was the real prequels, George Lucas really screwed up, not realizing that, TCW was George's show, and that Filoni is not the apprentice that a lot of people think he seems to be, especially because it would later come to be known that he didn't actually write most of TCW until season 7. So, yeah. But yeah, it was a very, very busy time for Star Wars, and I was curious to see what Disney would do. We got Star Wars Rebels, which initially I was concerned about because, so, I knew that if they were going to make the sequels, they were going to have to retcon the new Jedi Order stuff. I wasn't a huge a devout follower of the EU, I followed parts of it. I actually, one of my favorite things was reading one of the Star Wars visual dictionaries, which I had. It was the one with Vader on the cover. I forget when it came out, but that one went very deep into the expanded universe and how it tied into the films, and I remember being big into that. I remember watching Star Wars videos that basically recap what happened, and I was always intrigued and interested in what I saw, but I never actually experienced most of it. I experienced a little bit of it. Like, I remember reading the comic where Ventress is killed and dies in Obi-Wan's arms, later being confused as to how that could happen when, Ventress's origins were in TCW. I remember, like, obviously I played a lot of video games, and most of those were expanded universe or, stuff like Lego, which granted isn't expanded universe stuff, that's non-canonical, but you know what I mean. But like I played Force Unleashed, that's expanded universe material. I played Star Wars Battlefront, which ties into parts of the expanded universe, and I played Rise of the Empire. I remember playing that a lot, really enjoying the scenarios that they had. And I also remember reading a few of the comics, watching the 2D Clone Wars and such. However, I wasn't that big of a devout follower of the EU, but I knew about it. I knew at least a good chunk about it, and I knew that some of that stuff would be retconned. The biggest one for me was Force Unleashed. That one hit the hardest for me because I really liked Force Unleashed, and hearing that the EU, including the 2D Clone Wars and Force Unleashed, and even a couple of other projects I played, would be non-canonical, was a big pill to swallow. That's probably why I was kind of worried about Disney taking over Star Wars. That I thought they would just have to retcon the sequels, or the post Return of the Jedi stuff. They would have to retcon the post Return of the Jedi stuff for the sake of the sequels even being allowed to exist, because that time frame is so stuffed. But no, they retconned everything. And honestly, I still think it's one of the biggest mistakes that Disney Star Wars has made. It's like, I understand in order to make your sequels, you have to wipe clean the post, Return of the Jedi stuff. And that's fine, but I feel like there was so much material lost from that era that you could have used as a basis for the sequels. Like, why wasn't Mara Jade a thing? I remember hearing so much about Mara Jade, and I wanted to maybe see if she could be a thing in live action, but it just never happened. I always heard about these stories, but I thought, oh well, maybe they'll adapt some of them, and I mean, they did with Rise of Skywalker. They certainly did. I didn't understand why they, and to be honest, I still don't. I don't understand why they had to retcon stuff before Return of the Jedi. Like, why did Force Unleashed have to go? Why did the 2D Clone Wars, which does tie into TCW, by the way. TCW mentions parts of the 2D show. That is a thing. Why did that have to go? Why did, the duel with Anakin and Ventress? Honestly, in my mind, that could still work as canon. And then there's, other stuff, why did KOTOR have to go? Why did, that whole era was just blipped? It's like all of this is now being considered Star Wars Legends, and I was a little miffed. I was still looking forward to the sequels. I still wanted to see what would happen, but I was pretty miffed at Disney for doing that. And to be honest, I still think it was a big mistake. You didn't have to blip KOTOR. You didn't have to blip some of this stuff. Obviously, there are some things that just wouldn't be able to work with the new canon, but I don't know. I still feel like they could have kept some of it around. And some people might say, oh, but it would have been too confusing for audiences. But I mean, would it really? Most modern audiences for Star Wars don't follow the EU. Obviously, yes, they would have to retcon post-Return of the Jedi stuff. That makes sense. I understand why they wanted to do that, because they wanted to make room for the sequels. In fact, George Lucas wanted to, had sequel trilogy treatments that would go unused for reasons I won't get into, but he was probably going to retcon the post-Return of the Jedi stuff, and that was going to be his story. Hell, TCW retcons tons of the old expanded universe lore because TCW was his show. And he did, unfortunately, step all over a lot of stories from the old canon. And I'll talk about it more when I get to that, but it was, in a way, kind of already happening. George Lucas was sort of overwriting canon, as well as Dave Filoni, of course, because Dave Filoni was also involved. But I don't want to solely put it on Dave Filoni, because a lot of decisions that some people find controversial, mainly with Mandalorians and Ventress and Darth Maul and the Night Sisters, a lot of that stuff was George. Whether you think it was a good idea or not, that's up to you. Whether you like TCW or not is up to you. There are parts about the old EU I prefer over TCW, like Grievous as an example. And there are stories that I remember reading and watching that did get stepped over by TCW, and that did kind of irk me a little bit. But, I was still a fan of the show regardless. I'm a little more accepting of it now because I know about the behind-the-scenes aspect and how it was George's show. But I will admit it would have been nice if it kind of correlated and played nice with the EU a little bit more, but it just didn't. But it is what it is now. What's done is done. Either way, the old EU was slowly being wiped away before Disney, but Disney just got rid of all of it when I feel like you could have used some of those stories and integrated them into canon. It's not like it would have meant much, because like KOTOR is so far in the past. What's the harm in just letting KOTOR or a version of it remain? And true, yes, a version of it does remain because we're getting a remake, but oh, that remake is never coming out. Either way, why can't Shadows of the Empire, a popular book, remain? Why can't Force Unleashed remain? Why can't the 2D Clone Wars remain? Why can't you find a way to integrate these stories? Why not keep these stories around? Because they will do nothing to the sequel trilogy. Like, the thing is like people don't have to... The thing about the expanded universe is that people don't have to consume every single little bit of it, if that's even possible. Most of these stories were just in their own pocket of the universe. They were their own thing. I highly doubt, the 2D Clone Wars and Anakin's duel with Ventress is going to play a part in the sequel trilogy, This isn't like the New 52, where the superheroes have an established lore and continuity, and when they were rebooting like the DC universe, they said, oh, well, this story's still canon, and this story's still canon, and all of these are still canon, but smushed into a different time frame, and yada, 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 and that's how that worked. It wasn't like that. No, like the EU, you could have kept a good chunk of it intact, but you didn't. And instead, now you're trying to fill it up with more pointless and arguably worse stories, with a couple of exceptions. Obviously there are some exceptions. Andor and Rebels, I do think, are both better storytelling-wise than Force Unleashed. So that was an improvement. But there are other things that just aren't as good. And even then, the new canon is just a mess, but I won't get into it now. But yeah, I remember losing a lot of that lore was a big, big hit. However, I did give Star Wars Rebels a chance. I remember an early video of me talking about Rebels and, just the early previews of the show. I thought it looked interesting. I didn't know it was made by the same people that made TCW, except maybe Dave Filoni. Maybe I knew about that one. But, eventually I did learn of it, which is probably why I gave it more of a chance. And overall, while Season 1 was a little childish at times, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was an okay season. And thankfully, Star Wars Rebels would get better with time. I thought the first season was pretty good. I think people are a little harsh on it. I actually think it's a pretty decent season, but, Season 2, I think, is better than Season 1. Season 3 is on par, if not better than Season 2, and Season 4 I think is the best season of the show. Rebels got better with time, and honestly, if I'm being honest here, I remember watching Rebels as it aired, and I'll talk about it more when I get to Rebels as a whole, but Rebels I do think is actually a pretty consistently great show. Like, it gets better with each season, and there really isn't a bad episode of the bunch, just some episodes that are weaker than others. And I greatly enjoyed seeing Kanan and Ezra trying to, fight the Inquisitor. I enjoyed the finale of Season 1 quite a bit. I loved seeing Ahsoka and later Maul back as well, and them kind of closing some of the chapters of TCW, since TCW never really got a proper finale. While we did get a rushed 12-episode Season 6, which was basically whatever episodes they had left over that could be finished. We didn't get a full Season 6. We did get some stories to sort of wrap up some loose ends, but it was a very underwhelming ending. And it wouldn't be until after Rebels that we got TCW Season 7, which, my thoughts on the season as a whole, Siege of Mandalore I still really love, and it did give a sense of finality to TCW, which is pretty nice. And, that was probably the point of the season as a whole, honestly, was just to give TCW an ending. But when it came to Rebels, that was the first time we saw Ahsoka since she left in Season 5. She left the Order in Season 5. And, then we had Darth Maul, and, we hadn't seen him since Season 5. We did see him in Son of Dathomir, a comic. I did read it, I think a little while after seeing him in Rebels. I forget when I read it, but I read it via piracy. Nowadays, I actually do have a digital version of the comic, and I might get a physical of it at some point, just for collector's sake, but, I pirated it at the time, so, yeah, anyway. Yeah, so Star Wars Rebels, while I was apprehensive about it retconning parts of the old EU I liked, mainly Force Unleashed, I look back on it, and I do actually think it works better for the story of not just TCW, but also just for the films itself. And I think Rebels is a genuinely underrated gem. I think people are a little too hard on it. I think it's pretty good. So yeah, I enjoyed seeing Ezra develop. I enjoyed seeing the Ghost crew. They're actually probably some of my favorite cast of Star Wars, of the TV shows, besides maybe TCW, because they really do play off of each other well and feel like a tight-knit family, I like, Din Djarin and Grogu, but they're not as interesting to me as the Ghost crew. They don't have they're not quite as enjoyable seeing them interact, because, Grogu's a baby. There's only so much you can do with that. Yeah, there's some funny moments and some annoying moments here and there with Grogu, but ultimately there's only so much that, Din Djarin, as good of a character as he was in Season 1 and 2, there's only so much you can really do with the interactions. It's why they had other characters besides just those two accompany them on their adventures, like, having, I forget Gina Carano's character. They had her interact with Din. They had sort of a supporting cast. They brought in other characters like Bo-Katan and Ahsoka because, otherwise wouldn't really have anyone major to play off of except Grogu, and that can work for a bit, but not forever. And then there's Andor, which really the only cast member that really sticks around most of the time is just Andor. And he's great, and the rest of the cast of Andor is great as well, but I always enjoyed the interactions with the Ghost crew the most, and that made them my favorite cast to follow. Andor Season 2 and Season 1 are still great, though. I haven't finished Season 2 yet. I'll get to it. Anyway, point is, while I was apprehensive at first, Star Wars Rebels I did like. I know a lot of people didn't like it, and I was aware of some of the reaction, but I honestly thought, it was one of the first times I kind of disagreed with the Star Wars fan base. I was like, nah, Rebels is pretty good. It's not perfect. I have issues with it. It's not as good as TCW, but, it's a good show. It's a pretty good show. Yeah, it's more kiddie in some ways, but I still think Rebels got away with quite a bit, given that it was a Disney XD show. It still got away with a lot, especially with the Season 2 finale. Like, the Season 2 finale in particular, my reaction when Kanan got rom-coded was just like, holy shit, he got rom-coded. Like, I literally, like, was just sitting there with my jaw dropped when Kanan was blinded by Maul. It was just like, holy crap, they let you do that. And yeah, you know, it cuts away. It's obviously, like, you know, they don't show the wound itself, but it's still, like, the way it was directed, the way it was shot, it was so shocking. It happened so fast. Like, oh, wow. They let you do that. And it's not a one-time thing. They don't magically cure it. Kanan is blind for the rest of the series, sort of. Like, he's blind for the rest of the show, and he has to deal with that. And, you know, it was really interesting. It was also nice to actually see the process of him recovering. You know, we never really got that with Rom Coda. Rom Coda recovered mostly off-screen, or, you know, just kind of didn't in the first game, but also kind of... We didn't really get much of him recovering from his blindness. You know, of him learning to see things through the Force, you know? With Kanan, we actually got to experience that. Yeah, it was neat. It was a neat choice. It was a big risk, too, because it's like, you know, that, like, this is a big change for such an important character of your shows. Like, goddamn. But yeah, you know, it's something I really appreciated. Honestly, I think people should give Rebels another chance. It's a really good show. It's not the most amazing, story ever or anything. Like, I wouldn't put it above TCW. I honestly think Andor is probably better. And yeah, it is a kid's show, so there are some very kiddie moments. But if you can look past it, honestly, I think it's really great. The characters are great. The character dynamics are great. I was really impressed with Star Wars Rebels and kept up with it for at least until the end of Season 3. I kind of dropped out with Season 4 because at that point, you know, I was kind of in between other stuff at the time. But, you know, I kept up with it for a good chunk of time because it was a show I enjoyed. Of course, you know, now we get to talk about the sequel trilogy a bit, and I don't want to spend too long talking about it because, you know, it's a bit negative because I wasn't the hugest fan of the sequels, but it didn't necessarily start off this way.